The 12 Days of Christmas by Debbie Macomber. This was an outstanding read. And anyone who is feeling like, ugh, this is just, life is getting me down. How can I move through this life? You need to get this book. I am going to read you the preface about what it's about. And then we are going to read every single page of this amazing book because it's that good. Continuing a festive annual tradition, #1 New York Times bestselling author Debbie Macomber returns with a new holiday novel full of romance and cheer, and magical prospect of finding love even in the most guarded hearts. Friendly and bubbly Julia Payton nearly likes everyone but her standoff neighbor Cain Maddox, who presents a challenge. No matter how hard she tries to be nice, Cain rudely rebuffs her at every turn, but when Julia catches Cain stealing her newspaper, that's the last straw. She's going to break through Cain Scrooge's like exterior, and the only way she knows how is by killing him with kindness. To track her progress, Julia starts a blog called 12 Days of Christmas. Her first attempt to humanize Cain are far from successful, but Julia brings him homemade Christmas treats and disagreeable Grinch won't even accept them. Meanwhile, Julia's blog becomes an online sensation. Julia continues to find ways to express kindness and little by little chips away at Cain's gruff facade to reveal the caring man underneath. Unbelievably, Julia frees herself falling for Cain and suspects that he may even be falling for her as well. But as the popularity of her blog grows, Julia must decide if telling Cain the truth about having chronicled their relationship to the rest of the world is worth risking the chance at love. Oh boy, oh boy. Julia. There's sometimes I wonder if my YouTube channel is a blessing or a curse because maybe it costs me my chance at love. In memory of Cindy Thomas DeBerry, who, with her love to her children and husband. Chapter 1. We'll see how, I will probably make it to Chapter 4 before I call it a night. Cain Maddox stepped into the elevator, and just as the doors were about to close, he heard a woman call out, "Hold that for me." Cain thrust out his arm to keep the doors open from sliding shut, and he inwardly groaned when he saw the woman who lived across the hall come racing toward him. He kept his eyes trained straight ahead, not inviting conversation. He run into this particular woman several times in the last few months since he moved into the building. She stopped several times to pet Schroeder, his Irish setter, the one he inherited from his grandfather when Bernie had to move into the assisted living complex. She chatted away, lavishing affectionately on the dog, not the talkative type. Cain responded minimally to her questions. He liked her all right, but she was a bit much over the top with cutesy smile. Okay, he'd admit it. He found her attractive. He wasn't sure about what it was about her because usually the chirpy, happy ones didn't appeal to him. Regardless, nothing would come of it, and that suited him, and he knew better. Yet every time he saw her with a yellow light started flashing in his head. Warning, warning, danger ahead. Cain could feel this woman was trouble from the first moment he saw her, and he heard her exuberant "Good morning." Even her name was cheerful. Julia. Look at her. It was the easy envision, the opening scene from The Sound of Music with Julie Andrews, twirling around, arms extended, singing, joyful, excited. Even the thought that she was enough to make Cain cringe. He could do happy, just not first thing in the morning. To put it simply, he found little good about mornings, and second, he learned a long time ago not to trust women, especially the types who were enthusiastic and friendly. Experience had taught him well, and having been burned once, he wasn't eager to repeat that experience. "Thanks," she said, a bit breathlessly, as she floated onto the elevator. Yes, floated. Her coat swirled around her as she came to stand beside him. On her coat lapel she wore a pretty Christmas tree pin that sparkled with a jewel tone. "I'm running late this morning." Pushing the button to close the door, Cain ignored her. He didn't mean to be rude, but he wasn't up for conversation. "Didn't I see you walking Schroeder in the dog park the other day?" she asked. No, he hadn't seen her. Maybe he had, but he still wasn't willing to admit it. "Really, I'm pretty sure I saw you." He let her comment fall into empty space. Could this elevator move any slower? Fortunately, the elevator arrived at the foyer before she could continue the conversation. "You aren't much of a morning person, are you?" she asked as he collected his newspaper, tucked it under his arm, and headed for the door. Julia reached for her own and followed him. Would he never shake this woman? They were were welcomed by the Seattle drizzle that was a part of the winter norm for the Pacific Northwest. Kane's office at the insurance company, where he worked as an actuary, was within easy walking distance. Julia marched her steps with his until she reached the bus stop outside Starbucks, where, thankfully, she stopped. "Have a good day," she called after him. Kane would, especially now that he was free of Miss Sunshine. "Excuse me." Julia Patton stood in the foyer of her apartment building the following morning, astonished that her neighbor would steal her newspaper while she was directly in front of him. She braced her fist against her hip and raised both of her finely shaped eyebrows at him. Showing his displeasure, Cain Maddox turned to face her, newspaper in hand. He had to be the most unpleasant human being she ever met. She tried the friendly route and got the message. Even his dog had better manners than he did. "I believe that newspaper is mine." Her apartment number had been clearly written with a bold Sharpie over the plastic wrapper. This was no innocent mistake. For whatever reason, Cain had taken a disliking to her. Well, fine, she could deal with that, but she wasn't about to let him to walk all over her, and she wasn't going to stand by idly and let him steal from her either. At the sound of her voice, Cain looked up. Irritated and more than a little annoyed, Julia thrust out her hand, palm up. "My newspaper, please." To her astonishment, he hesitated. "Oh, please." She caught him red-handed in the act, and he had the nerve to look at her, irritated. Now, how typical. Not only was he reluctant to return it, but he didn't have the common decency to look the little bit guilty. She'd say one thing about him: the man had nerve. "Someone took mine," he explained, as if that gave him the right to steal hers. "Well, take someone else's. It doesn't matter if it's technically yours or not." "It most certainly does. It matters to me." To prove her point, she jerked her hand at him one second time. "I'm not taking someone else's newspaper, and you most certainly are not taking mine. Now give it to me." "Okay, fine." He slapped the newspaper into her open palm, then reached over and snagged some other unsuspecting apartment owner. Julia's jaw sagged open. "I can't believe you did that." He rolled his eyes, tucked the newspaper under his arm, and headed toward the revolving door, briefcase in hand. This wasn't the first time her morning newspaper had mysteriously disappeared either. And now she knew who was responsible. Not only was Cain Maddox unfriendly, he was a thief. Briefly, she wondered what else he might be responsible for taking. And this so close to Christmas, too, the season of goodwill and charity. Of course, theft was wrong at any time of year, but resorting to it during the holidays made it downright immoral. Apparently, her grumpy neighbor hadn't taken the spirit of Christmas to heart. That shouldn't surprise her. Cain and Julia often left for work close to the same time, in the morning. 3 times this week, they inadvertently met at the elevator. Being a morning person and naturally cheerful, Julia always greeted him with a sunny smile and a warm good morning. The most response she'd gotten out of him was a terse nod. Mostly, he ignored her as if he hadn't heard her speak. Julia waited until she was on the bus before she called to her best friend, Cammie Nightingale, who now lived outside of Denver. They attended college together. Cammie had graduated ahead of her when Julia's finances had dried up and she'd been forced to take night classes and work full-time. After seeing so many of her friends struggle to pay off their student loans, Julia had opted to avoid financial struggles. Yes, it took her longer to get her degree in communications, and no, she hadn't found the job of her dreams, but she was close, so close. Furthermore, she was debt-free. Currently, she worked at Macy's department store, where she'd been employed for the last 7 years. "You wouldn't believe what happened to me this morning," she said as soon as Cammie picked her up. Her friend was unmarried and had a 2-year-old and a newborn. "Hold on a minute," Cammie said. In her irritation, Julie hadn't asked if Cammie could talk. She waited a couple minutes before her friend picked up again. "What's going on?" "My disagreeable neighbor, the one I told you about, is a thief. He tried to steal my newspaper." "He didn't." "I caught him red-handed, and when I confronted him and demanded he give it back to me, he took someone else's." "What? You're kidding me." "No joke. Not only that, he was rude again." Come to think of it, he'd never been anything but unfriendly. It was men like him who put a damper on Christmas. Julia refused to let him or anyone else spoil her holidays. "Are you talking about the guy who lives right across the hall from you?" "The very one." The more Julia thought about what he'd done, the more upset she got. Okay, so he wasn't a morning person. She could deal with that. But to steal her newspaper, that was low. "What do you know about him?" Cammie asked. "Nothing. Well, other than he was a gorgeous Irish setter that he walks every morning, and she tried being neighborly, but Cain had let it be known he wasn't interested. She stated more than one conversation only to be subtle, and not so subtly informed he took no expression to small talk. After such attempts, she got the message. Maybe he's shy. Cammy possessed a generous spirit. By the time she was wrong, anyone who would take a newspaper without a shred of guilt wasn't shy. I doubt it. Trust me on this, Cain Maddox isn't shy, and furthermore, he's not to be trusted. You do not know that. You're wrong. I have this gift. It's a sixth sense about men, and this one is sinister. Cammy's laughter filled the phone. Sinister? Come on, Julia. I'm serious, she insisted. Just what kind of man steals a newspaper? I don't know what I ever did to offend him, but he made it more than clear that he would rather kiss a snake than have anything to do with me. That bothered Julia more than she was comfortable admitting. He was kind of cute, too, in a stiff sort of way. He was a tall, good 6 or 7 inches above her own 5'5" frame. His hair was dark and cut in a way that she would find professional. The shape of his jaw indicated he had a stubborn bent, but that could be conjecture on her part, based on what she knew about him. And as best as she could tell, he didn't possess a single laugh line, although he did have a beautiful, clear, dark chocolate eyes. The only time that she'd seen anything but a suit was when he was at the dog park. He wore a jacket with the name of an insurance company with a logo, which she was assumed he was connected to in some way, and jeans. Even then, he didn't look relaxed. He held himself away from others. Are you attracted to him? Cammy asked. You've got to be kidding me. No way. I have this feeling this is why you're 31 and not in a serious relationship. How long are you going to hold on to Dylan, Julia? That again, Julia didn't have time for relationships, and she was for sure wasn't going to drag Dylan into the conversation. She was over him and had been for a long time. The problem she had was no time to date. Between working and volunteering at the church and for the Boys and Girls Club, Cammy knew that. Besides, she had more important matters on her mind. The blog. The challenge. She'd gone through 2 intense interviews at Harvestware, a major software company, and the list had been narrowed down to 2 people. Because the job was in social media, the company had suggested a competition between the 2 candidates in the form of a blog. The one who could generate the largest following in a month of December would be awarded the job. Julia had gladly accepted the challenge. Unfortunately, she hadn't had a lot of success so far. Her following was minimal at best. This was her chance to prove herself. Maybe your neighbor is the man of your dreams. Cain Maddox? He's cold, Cammy. You haven't even seen him. I have. Trust me, he's not the kind of man you'd want to meet in a dark alley. The more Julia thought about it, the more convinced she became that her neighbor was some disreputable character. A chill went down her spine just thinking about the cold look in his eyes. Cammy laughed out loud. Your creative imagination's getting away from you, my friend. Maybe, but I doubt it. Julia, her friend said in a calm way of hers that suggested Julia was overreacting, he took your newspaper. He didn't threaten to bury you in concrete. It's the look in his eyes, like he was looking straight through people. You noticed his eyes? Yes, they're brown and dark, real dark and distant. Okay, Cammy was probably right. To see him in a criminal term was a bit of a stretch, but Julia was not having a warm, cozy feeling toward her neighbor. If that's the case, then I think you should kill him, Cammy suggested. Julia gasped. She couldn't believe her bestie would even hint at such a thing. Kill him with kindness, Cammy elaborated. This guy needs a whole lot more than kindness. Leave it to her tender-hearted friend to suggest something sweet and good. It's 12 days until Christmas, she added, after a moment of sounding excited. Yeah, so? This is it, Julia. You've been waiting for or wanting an idea that would generate interest in your blog. Your neighbor is the perfect subject. Cammy seemed to be growing more enthused by the second. Weren't you just saying the other day how you were desperate for an over-the-top idea? Well, yes, but... This is perfect, Cammy continued. Kill him with kindness on your blog and report your progress for the next 12 days. Julia wasn't keen on this. The less exposure to Cain Maddox she had, the better. I don't know. The countdown is sure to attract attention to your blog. All you need to do is to be kind to him. You're naturally friendly and funny. This guy, you won't even know what hit him. And then you can document what happens on your blog. Mark my words, your readers will love this. Did you just hear what I said? Julia reminded her friend. I can tell you right now, kindness isn't going to affect him one way or another. You won't know until you try. Julia bit down on her lower lip, and visions of winning that highly paid position swirled in her head. Maybe Cammy was right. Maybe this idea would just be what she needed to generate the following that would show off her communication writing skills. I think people are responding to my blog about Christmas decorations. Julia, do you have any idea how many people blog about making homemade tree ornaments? You are no Martha Stewart. You need something fresh and fun, a subject that will pique their interest, something different, and frankly, wreath making isn't it. Surely there was a better way to tackle this challenge. Showing kindness to someone she disliked wouldn't be easy. In addition, she sincerely doubted it would make any difference. The man was annoying, disagreeable, and stubborn. You aren't saying anything, Cammy said, interrupting her thoughts, which from experience I know is a good sign. You're actually considering doing this, aren't you? Bouncing her index finger against her mouth, Julia said, I suppose killing him with kindness is worth a try. It totally is, and you can write your title, your blog, 12 Days of Christmas. Truthfully, Julia wasn't convinced this would work. Cammy had no reservations, though. It could inspire an entire movement. I'll give it some thought. Good. Gotta scoot. Scotty's eating the cat food again. Julia smiled as she disconnected, picturing the toddler eagerly stuffing the cat food into his mouth while his mother was sidetracked on the phone. Cammy was great with ideas as a person, and Julia appreciated her friend's insight. Bottom line, Julia didn't know how much longer she could hold out working in the menswear at Macy's. The holidays were the most challenging. Her hours were long, and she required to work in the wee hours of the morning on Black Friday, which meant she hadn't been able to fly home for Thanksgiving. Spending time with her family over Christmas looked to be a bust, too. Her parents would have been happy to pay for her airfare, but at 31, Julia didn't feel like they should rely on them to pick up the expense. Besides, she had commitments. At her church pianist, she was needed to accompany the choir. The talented singing group had scheduled a few appearances, the last of which was coming up this weekend. She was grateful her boss had agreed to let her schedule her hours around her obligations. In addition, Julia was a volunteer for the holiday program at the Boys and Girls Club. The bus continued to plug along as her thoughts spun with ideas. Julia gazed out the window, admiring the lights in the windows displays along the short route that would take her to the very heart of downtown Seattle. She really did love the holidays. It was a special time of year. Maybe she could treat Cain Maddox's surly mood with an extra dose of nice. It would be interesting to test of the power of kindness. As a bonus, she wouldn't need to stress about the content for her blog. She would simply be reporting the results. Easy peasy. But being impulsive had gotten her into trouble before, and so Julia decided to mull it over before making a final decision. By the time she returned to her apartment that evening, it was dark and miserable with drizzling rain and heavy traffic. Her feet hurt and she was exhausted. These long holiday hours at the store were killers. Her mind automatically went to her neighbor, killing him with kindness. It was a shame that Cain Maddox was such a killjoy. Not wanting to fuss with dinner, she heated a can of soup and ate it with her feet propped in front of her television. She caught the last of the local news broadcasts. The weatherman was forecasting more drizzle. In the mood for something to lift her spirits, she turned off the television and reached for her phone. A little music was sure to do that. Besides, it was good to familiarize herself with the songs for the performance coming up this weekend. Scrolling down her playlist, she chose a few classic Christmas carols, the one the senior citizens seemed to enjoy the most at the choir's last performance at the assisted living complex. Julia sang along with the music as she washed a few dishes she dirtied, then tidied her apartment. Music had always soothed her. She sang loudly through the personal favorites, Silent Night, O Little Town of Bethlehem, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. She was about to belt out Joy to the World when someone pounded against her door. The knock was sharp and impatient, determined. Oh dear, Julia hoped her singing hadn't disturbed anyone. She opened the door wearing an apologetic smile and was confronted by her nemesis from across the hall. Cain Maddox, she should have known. His eyes snapped with irritation. "What can I do for you?" she asked, doing her best to remain pleasant. He continued to glare at her, his scowl darkening his already shaded eyes. It was a shame, too. He was a very attractive man, or he could be if he wasn't constantly frowning. She noticed he had a high forehead above a shapely mouth. Her father claimed a high forehead was a sign of intelligence, which was ridiculous. The only reason he said that was because his forehead was high. The thought caused her to smile. "Is anyone dying in here? Because that's what it sounds like." Holding her temper was a challenge. "Are you referring to my singing?" "Tone it down." "Not please, not thank you, just a demand." With one hand still on her apartment door, Julia met his stare. "It's music, Christmas music, to be precise." "I know what it is," he said with a groan, and briefly slammed his eyes shut. "Would I be so wrong to suggest that a kind, gentle soul such as yourself objects to a few classic Christmas carols?" she asked, ever so sweetly. Her words flowed like warm honey. He glared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "All I ask is that you please cut the racket." "Please?" she supplied. "Please what?" "Please cut the noise," she said, with the warmest of smiles, fake as it was. "Whatever." Cain shook his head as if he found both her and irritating and ridiculous. She searched for a witty retort, but couldn't think of anything cutting enough to put him in his place. Before she could respond, Cain returned to his own apartment and slammed the door. "Well, well," Julia muttered underneath her breath as she closed the door. Perhaps Cammy was right. This man desperately needed help, and she was just the woman to see to it. She'd kill him with kindness if it was the last thing she ever did. Inspired now, she took out her laptop, sat down on the sofa, making herself comfortable. She stretched out her legs, crossing her ankles, booting up her computer. She went to her blog, and she saw that 50 people had logged in to read her latest posts. So far, her efforts weren't going to impress anyone. Most of those who read her blog were family and friends. The solitary comments had come from her mother. Julia's finger settled over the keyboard as she typed away. This is Julia's blog, 12 Days of Christmas, December 14th. Meet Ebenezer. I'm wondering if anyone else has ever encountered a genuine curmudgeon this Christmas season. The reason I ask is because I believe Ebenezer Scrooge lives in my apartment building. To be fair, he hasn't shared his views on Christmas with me personally. One look and I can tell this guy doesn't possess a single ounce of holiday spirit. He just so happens to live directly across the hallway from me, so I've run into him more than one occasion. To put it mildly, he's not a happy man. Just this morning I discovered he's something else. He's a thief. I caught him pilfering with my newspaper. Really, it does not get much lower than that. Well, as a matter of fact, it does. This evening, not more than a few minutes ago, I was confronted by my neighbor demanding that I turn down the Christmas quote-unquote racket. I happened to be singing. He claimed it sounded like someone was dying. When I complained about him to a friend, and okay, I'll admit I was pretty ticked off at the time, it came to me that this cold-hearted quote-unquote neighbor is a living, breathing Scrooge. My friend, who is dear and near to my heart, suggested I kill him with kindness. So, my friends, I hope you'll join me in this little experiment. I fully intend to kill my surly neighbor with the love, joy, and fun of the Christmas. Naturally, I will keep this identity confidential, referring to him only as Ebenezer. I'm not exactly sure where to start. If you have my thoughts or suggestions, please share them below. I'll be updating this blog every day until Christmas. Hopefully by then, this Grinch's heart will have grown a few sizes. My expectations are low. I'm not very convinced that kindness can change a person. We'll find out together. I welcome your comments and ideas. Chapter 2. The very first thing the next morning, Julia checked her blog, and she smiled when she saw that she already had 50 views and 10 shares. To her delight, there were 3 comments. Maggie Murphy. Good luck. This should be interesting. That first comment was from a college friend who had faithfully been reading her blog and supporting her efforts. The second comment was from a new reader. Jingle Bell Girl. The best gift you can give during the holidays is holiday cheer. I'm excited to read your blog. Good luck. And the last comment was from an unfamiliar name as well. As far as she could see, she had at least 2 new readers. Derek Dude, 120. Don't waste your time. Once an Ebenezer, always an Ebenezer. Julia knew exactly what she wanted to do for her first kindness experiment. She'd come up with the idea before falling asleep. She showered and dressed and collected both Kane and her newspapers. She rode the elevator back up to the floor and then knocked on Kane's door, and she heard a loud bark from the other side, followed by a muffled voice a few moments later. "Who is it?" "Your neighbor," she returned, gushing with charm. "Payton, Julia Payton." She did a poor imitation of James Bond. Silence followed by, "What do you want?" "I come bearing gifts." "I'm busy." "No problem. I'll lean it against your door." "Lean what against my door?" "You'll see. Don't you like to be surprised?" she called out. The door flew open, and he stood in front of her, his face covered in shaving cream, with a razor in hand. His leg blocked Schroeder from getting into the hallway. The Irish setter's tail wagged. His master might not be friendly, but Schroeder was. Kane's gaze narrowed. "I don't like surprises." "Here's your newspaper," he grumbled and took it out of her hand and tossed it on the table next to his door. "You're welcome," she said pointedly at a lack of appreciation. Turning away, she was fairly certain she heard him grumble, and knowing she was getting his goat, she added, "Have a good morning, whatever." She grinned. "You say that a lot, don't you? Would you mind? I'd like to finish shaving." "Of course." Julia did her best to keep her voice friendly and good-natured. This was working so well. She could barely stand it. Cammy was right. Kindness was going to torment him, and the truth was Julie really wanted to annoy him the same way he annoyed her. With a game plan in mind, she returned to her apartment and waited until she heard his door open as he left for work. Making it seem like pure coincidence, she stepped out of her apartment at the same time and met him at the elevator. "We meet again," she said in her most cheerful voice that would rival Mary Poppins. His gaze narrowed as it had her before he looked away. She smiled when she noticed, and he had his morning newspaper tucked under his arm. It was then that she noticed a piece of tissue stuck to his chin. He apparently cut himself while shaving. Her eyes widened. "I hope my interruption wasn't responsible for you nicking your face." "No," Kane said impatiently. He hit the button for the lobby for the second time, as if it would cause the elevator to descend faster. "Those little cuts can be so annoying." "So can pesky neighbors," he muttered. Julie smiled. Oh, this was good. "I don't mean to be pesky. I was just collecting my newspaper, and I thought I'd get yours at the same time. I'm happy to do that for you. I'll set it outside your door and give you a gentle knock so you know it's there." "Don't. Don't knock. Don't get my newspaper." "Why not? I'm getting my own. It's not any trouble. Just don't." "Okay, if that's what you want." As soon as they reached the lobby and the elevator door slid open, Cain made his escape. Looking at him rushing away, one would think that he was running for his life. "Have a good day," she called after him and waved. As soon as he was out of sight, she nearly doubled over with laughter. He couldn't get away from her fast enough. This was turning out to be better than she hoped. Feeling like she made progress, she decided to treat herself to a latte at the corner Starbucks. Luck was with her, and she noticed that Cain was 3 people ahead of her in line. Unable to resist, she called out loud enough for him and the entire crowd to hear, "Cain, I didn't know you came in here for coffee. I can pick one up for you in the morning if you like." He glanced over his shoulder, and she could have sworn she heard him groan. Phil, Julia's favorite barista, looked up and waved, "Morning, Julia." She raised her hand and wiggled her fingers back at him. "Morning. That's my neighbor. I'd like to buy his coffee." If she hadn't gotten Cain's full attention before she did now, he whirled around so fast he nearly knocked the man behind him off balance. His gaze shot straight to her. "I'll buy my own coffee." "It's my way of apologizing for tormenting you with my Christmas music last night." Phil looked from one to the other and then handed Cain his coffee. "I'll pay for my own coffee," Cain reiterated and slapped the money down on the counter. "Okay, if you insist. I'm just really sorry for disturbing your peaceful evening with my cheerful Christmas music." A lie if there ever was one. He walked past her and out the door a moment later. Interested in what Phil could tell her, Julia leaned forward as soon as she reached the counter. "Does that guy come in here very often?" "Most every morning. He always orders the same thing. Never says much." "That's what I thought." Not exactly a surprise or kind of info she was looking for. "Do you know anything else about him?" "Not really," Phil said. "He never talks to me or anyone else that I've ever seen." Julia assumed as much. She placed her order and then paid for Cain's coffee that following morning in the form of a gift card. "Tell him it's for me," she said with the most giddy excitement. Phil willingly joined her in her scheme. He seemed pretty adamant that he didn't want you buying his coffee. "I know he's not exactly the friendly type." "I noticed," Phil said as he wrote her order out on her cup. "I'll make sure I'm at the register in the morning. I'll keep the gift card here and use it then." "Perfect. Thanks, Phil." His reaction should be interesting. The barista's I lost my place. The barista eyes widened. "That's exactly what Julia was hoping. I just wish I could be here to see it." Once she collected her drink, Julia had to hurry to the bus stop in order to catch the bus. As it was, she was the last one to board. The woman was driving Cain nuts, and he wasn't falling for that sweeter-than-honey smile of hers either. No one was naturally that perky in the morning. She had to be doing this for the sole purpose of getting a reaction out of him. She might be cute, to be honest, more than cute, but he wasn't willing to play whatever game she conjured up to torment him. His best option was to ignore her, which he fully intended to do. Walking briskly now, he headed down the street to the Harvard Insurance Company. He specifically chosen his apartment building because it was within easy walking distance to his job. This offered him the opportunity to return to his apartment for lunch and then take Schroeder out. He felt bad. He had to leave the Irish setter cooped up in the majority of the day. Thankfully, the dog was getting it on in years, slept most of the time anyway. When his grandfather had gone into assisted living complex, he was only allowed to bring dogs weighing 20 pounds and under. Schroeder was a brute 65 pounds. Bernie refused to leave Schroeder until Cain offered to give him a home to himself. Cain's thoughts drifted to his grandpa. He loved the old man who raised him. Now that Bernie was close to 80, his health was starting to decline. His credit, though, Gramps had adjusted well to the small apartment. Unlike Cain, his grandfather made friends easily. Even as a boy, Cain had reserved quiet and intense. His job was as an actuary assistant suited him. Numbers made sense to him. Unlike people, he rarely allowed anyone to get close, and for good reason. It seemed like every time he did, he regretted it. All he had to do was remember how Danny had betrayed him, but he wasn't going there. Morning, Mr. Maddox, the front desk receptionist greeting him the same way she did every day. He noticed she put up a small Christmas tree on the counter. He tipped his head and said morning, and continued past. He couldn't remember her name if his life depended on it. And that was just the way he liked it. He liked his life organized and structured. There was no way he was going to let it be vivacious, irritating neighbor disrupt that. He paused as he stepped into the office and closed the door, as if he chose to ignore the neighbor. Then why was he wasting time thinking about her now? It was a good question, and one he was reluctant to answer. Once at Macy's, Julia had a good day and suspected it was the distraction of her experiment with Cain. The shoppers didn't seem to be frenzied or impatient as usual, and she made sure to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and had her best sales date to date. After work, she headed off to the Boys and Girls Club to help her friend Jeremy with the youngsters as they prepared their holiday program. The kids were great, and Julia enjoyed them. She just had enough time to get from the Boys and Girls Club to church for their choir practice. The choral group enjoyed spending a bit of Christmas cheer and joy for those who were often ignored or forgotten. The previous week, they sung at the soup kitchen after volunteering to serve meals. This week, they would perform at the Manor House, an assisted living complex in the city. By the time Julia finished up the church and made it back to her apartment, it was 8:30 and she was pooped. Stopping by the mailbox in the lobby, she was collecting her assortment of bills when she noticed someone was joining her. It was Cain. He must have come from the gym because he wore Nike workout gear and a white towel dangling around his neck. She never noticed how buff he was. That was a pleasant surprise, although it shouldn't have been. Ignoring her, Cain checked his mailbox. Seeing that he had no mail, he closed it, and he paused and then glanced at her as if he expected her to comment. Julia would have if she wasn't exhausted. She spent 8 hours on her feet and then an additional 2 hours playing piano. The energy to be witty and cheerful wasn't in her. They silently rode the elevator together. He stood as far to one side as he could, and then she did the same on the other side. Julia could feel his gaze on her, almost as if he expected her to say something, and was suspicious when she didn't. When they reached the 3rd floor, they went to each other's respective doors. She started inside her apartment, but paused when she felt scrutiny. Looking over her shoulder, she noticed him staring at her, frowning. It almost seemed as if he was concerned about her lack of chatter. She smiled. "Have a good evening, Cain," she said. To her surprise, he returned, "You okay? You don't look so good." She managed a smile. "It's been a long day." He nodded curtly and disappeared into his apartment. Silly how a short, inchoate comment excited her. She wasn't entirely sure whether this was progress or not. It felt promising, though. Sitting on her sofa, laptop in hand, she opened her blog and saw that she had more than 100 hits along with 12 comments. Wow, she read the comments and took notes. Some of these were great ideas. Sassy Susan. "I love your thinking and totally agree that killing Ebenezer with kindness would be perfect. Rub his nose in the cheerful and goodwill." December 15th. The mailbox encounter. Julia's blog of 12 Days of Christmas. Operation Kill Him with Kindness continues. Tormenting him with my cheerful chatter. Check. I'm fairly certain he gritted his teeth when he saw me this morning. Phase 2. I brought him his newspaper and purchased his coffee for tomorrow with a Starbucks gift card. It'll be interesting to see how he reacts to that. A curious development this evening. We met at the lobby when I was collecting my mail, purely by coincidence. From previous experience, I had the feeling he would do just about anything to avoid me. It goes without saying that I'm not his favorite person, though I'm not sure this guy likes anyone. Scrooge, remember? I'm certain my attention has him utterly confused, not to mention how I pretended to ignore his rude responses, including every cold shoulder. I'm sure he doesn't know what to make of me. So I gave him another little cold shoulder myself this evening, an effort to keep him on edge, and because I was too tired for much else. Then, and this was what I found interesting, as I unlocked my door and I felt his gaze on me almost as if he was waiting for me to speak. When I looked back, I saw him studying me as if he was disappointed that I hadn't gushed with my usual charm. I wonder if I'm getting to him. Could it really possibly be so soon? It's only been 2 days. I'll close for now. I appreciate the comments, and to Hattie Homemaker, who wrote, quote, sweeten him up with peanut butter cookies. Works with my husband every time. End quote. I think you're onto something. Woo! I need another glass of water. We're on chapter 3. Remember I said we'd stop at chapter 4. Cain hated to admit it, but his irritating neighbor was beginning to get to him. He stood with Schroeder in the dark while waiting for the dog to do his business. His head was full of Julia. Determined as he was to put all the thoughts of her out of his mind, he found it nearly impossible. He hadn't been able to stop since their chance encounter the night before. When he saw her collecting her mail, he felt fairly certain she was only then getting home from work. She had one long day. Nothing said how exhausted she was more than the fact that she hadn't burst into jovial babble the instant she saw him. By all that she was right. He should count his blessings. At that other meeting, calculated out by chance, she brightened up like a yellow canary and started chirping like the cage door had unexpectedly sprung open. Cain hadn't meant to comment and regretted that he had. He cherished the peace and quiet of the elevator. Then he saw how slowly she walked to her apartment door. The deciding factor came when she looked over her shoulder at him with a weary expression. Cain hadn't been able to help himself. It was in her eyes, round and hopeful, as if all she needed was a kind word from him to restore her. Fool that he was, Cain had given in and instantly regretted it. Their conversation was short, which sure led to more conversations, and he wasn't interested in being neighborly or anything else. Julia needed to stay on her side of the hall, and he would gladly do the same. As a result of his slip in judgment, Cain had spent the restless night, convinced he'd given little Miss Sunshine all the encouragement she needed to force-feed her sweetness into his life. Well, that wasn't going to happen. Schroeder let out one sharp bark, and Cain realized his dog was eager to get back into the warmth of the apartment. Sorry, buddy, Cain murmured. Be sure you're done, because I won't be back until lunchtime. It's Bernie's birthday, and I need to buy him a gift. I was thinking about a sweater. You got any better ideas? Schroeder stared at him blankly. That's what I thought. A sweater will have to do. Schroeder led the way back to the apartment. If he hurried this morning routine, he just might escape the elevator with her. Julia suspected that Cain was probably looking to avoid her at the elevator, so she equally determined to make sure she manipulated it so they left at the same time. She was ready and waiting when she heard the movement across the hallway. That was her cue. "Ah, we meet again," she said, grinning gleefully back at him. "It seems we leave about the same time every morning." "I notice, and I don't think it's a coincidence." He had a small scab forming from the shaving cut from the morning before. "I didn't get your newspaper this morning, as you requested." He kept his gaze focused on the floor numbers. "Looks like we're in for another day of drizzling rain. Does the rain bother you?" "Not particularly. Me neither." "Are you always this chipper in the morning?" he asked. "Always. Would it be possible for you to tone it down a little?" She swallowed a smile. "I can try. It would be appreciated." The elevator stopped on the second floor for an elderly gentleman Julia didn't recognize got on. "Morning," she greeted. "Morning," the older man said, and inclined his head toward her. Julia looked over at Cain. "So you're going to Starbucks nearly every morning?" His gaze narrowed. "How'd you know that?" "Phil told me." "Who's Phil?" "The barista." The fact that he didn't know Phil said he hadn't paid minimal attention to the waitstaff. "Daily Starbucks doesn't fit into my budget," Julia continued, "but I manage to treat myself once or twice a week. Have you ever tried their peppermint mocha? It's one of the seasonal specialties, and it's the best." "You're chattering again." "Sorry, I'll try harder to get a grip on that," she said, and pantomized, zipping her lips closed. The elevator door opened, and once more Cain rushed out like a bat escaping a cave, determined to get away from her. "Have a wonderful day," Julia called after him, offering her a small wave. Although he couldn't see her, once more, as soon as he was out of the sight, she struggled to smother a laugh. She wasn't sure she was supposed to enjoy this experiment so much. Certainly it was more fun than she thought it would be, because she was a few minutes early. Julia stopped to chat with Eddie, who managed the front desk, complimenting him on the Christmas tree and other holiday paraphernalia that decorated the lobby before heading out to the bus stop. Phil must have seen her waiting outside, because he came out of Starbucks a few minutes later wearing a big grin. Julia was excited to see him, wondering how Cain reacted to her gesture for a cup of coffee. "So," she said even before he reached her, "what happened?" He handed Julia the gift card. He refused to accept it. That figures. It didn't surprise her that she was disappointed. Phil gave her an odd look, as if he wasn't sure should even ask the question. Are you interested in this guy, romantically? A horrified look came over her. You're joking, right? Well, it certainly seems that way. If you are, I'd advise you to save your breath. He's one cold fish. I'm looking to spread a little Christmas cheer is all, she explained, unwilling to talk about what she was doing or her blog. I don't think this neighbor of yours is into Christmas. That would be Julia's guess as well. She didn't expect that he would be, which was sad. She didn't understand how anyone could not appreciate Christmas. As the lyrics of one of her favorite Christmas songs said, it was the most wonderful time of the year. I better get back inside, Phil said. I'm on break. Thanks again. I appreciate the help. Yeah, no problem. I'm sorry it didn't work out. Me too. She hadn't expected Cain to accept, but part of her had hoped that he would. It would have shown a small crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. Despite everything, she wanted to think he wasn't immune to kindness. Phil started to leave, but then turned back. He asked about you. Cain did? She saw that the bus was approaching and groaned. What did he want to know? Sorry, I got to get back inside and it looks like your bus is here. We'll connect later. Later, she echoed, disappointed it would be telling to learn what Cain had asked Phil about her. Julia's phone rang just as she clocked into work at the department store. Seeing it was Cammy, she decided to answer. She had an extra 5 minutes before she needed to be on the floor. Hey, Julia greeted her. What's up? What's up is you, Cammy said excitedly. What do you mean? You have 200 views on your most recent post. I do? Julia did a mental happy dance. Really? It had only been on for a few hours. This was unprecedented. I'm telling you, this blog idea is catching on, Cammy continued. It will win that contest for sure. You're a good as got this job, my friend. And just think, it was all your idea. You're killing him, Julia. She loved hearing it. She mentioned the gift card Cain had refused from Starbucks earlier, that he'd asked about her. When will you see Phil next? Cammy asked wide awake. I don't know. I guess I could stop in tomorrow morning. Do. You need to find out what Cain was asking. Her friend paused, and it was almost as if Julia could hear Cammy's mind spinning. I bet he's hot for you. Not happening, Julia countered swiftly. First off, he sees me as a nuisance. Fact is, I'm pretty sure he cringes every time he sets eyes on me. Pretty sure he's interested. Dig what you can out of Phil. Julia wasn't convinced that this was such a great idea. As it was, the barista had already suggested that she acted as if she was romantically interested in Cain. That was definitely a path she didn't intend to take. One thing she did find fascinating, though, was the fact that the experiment had been going on for only a couple of days, and already it appeared to be having an effect on Cain. As soon as she ended the conversation with Cammy, Julie headed out to the floor. Holiday shoppers waited outside the doors, and as soon as Macy's opened, the crowds rushed in for the latest bargains. Although she worked almost exclusively in menswear, Julia found 75% of her customers were women. Many were seeking presents for men in their lives. One of the few things Julia enjoyed about her job was helping others find the perfect gift. The morning sped by, and Julia stopped for lunch. While she sat in the break room, she read over the comments from her blog. Several of the readers offered her encouragement and advice. Some swore they had neighbors exactly like Cain and were implementing their own experiments. Seeing the interest in her blog had generated in only 2 days, encouraged by Julia, she owed Cammy for this idea. Jingle Bell Girl, keep up the chatter. Hashtag chatter for Christmas. May try kicking it up a notch with an elf outfit tomorrow. Julia smothered a laugh. She could just imagine Cain's face if she did. Sassy Susan was back as well with a comment. I love that you bought him coffee. Bet he drinks only a straight drip and of course no sugar. He doesn't like Christmas carols? Who doesn't like Christmas carols? He needs sweetening up. You might try fudge. When she returned from lunch after 1, she noticed the displays were a mess. Seeing the other sales staff were busy with customers, Julia took an opportunity to straighten the stack of sweaters that were currently discounted for the holidays. Excuse me, do you work here? The voice was all too familiar. It couldn't be. No way. Slowly she turned and couldn't hold back but a huge smile. How did she get so lucky? Cain was Christmas shopping. This she had to see. Yes, I do, she said, and beamed with a smile. His eyes widened when he saw it was her. An entire slaw of emotions crossed his face, and for half a second Julia thought he might make an excuse to leave. "How can I help you?" she asked. He continued to stare at her. "Is this a joke?" "What do you mean?" she asked with a look of innocence, her hands folded in front of her. He shook his head as if he didn't have an answer, or more likely would rather not say. "I work for Macy's, and I'd be happy to help you, Cain." He nodded as if he was a man accepting his fate and facing a hangman. "I need a man's sweater." "Do you have a price in mind?" "Not really. I want to make sure it's comfortable and warm. That's my only requirement." "Okay, what about color? Do you have a preference?" "Blue." "Size?" "Medium." She asked because she noticed how broad Cain's shoulders were. The man was stacked, and in good ways. She paid attention earlier, but even more so now. What a shame that he pushed people and relationships away. With a personality transplant, he would have the potential to be more than eye candy. To use a bit of cliché, a smile would certainly increase his face value. "Is it for you or someone else?" "Why do you want to know?" he asked, as if he was overstepped her bounds as a salesperson. It would be easy to take offense, but she didn't. "Because," she returned calmly, "if you were purchasing the sweater for yourself, I suggest going up a size. You have broad shoulders. I noticed you work out. It shows." He didn't let on that if he appreciated the compliment, not that she suspected he would. "Flatter, Julia." She hadn't been sure that he even knew her name, but he said it was a nice surprise. "It's a compliment." He didn't let his feelings be shown one way or the other. Instead, he answered her question. "The sweater isn't for me." She motioned toward the table where she'd been straightening out the inventory. "These are good quality sweaters, and they're on sale. We have higher-end choices as well if you're looking for something in cashmere." "These will do," he said, and then added, as if it pained him, "I appreciate your help." Dismissing her, Cain sorted through the sweaters, which left Julia to wait on another customer. She kept half an eye on him as he searched through the pile until he found what he wanted. It wasn't until she finished with the other customer that she remembered that Cain had thanked her. It was almost as if the words pained him to get out. Any sort of appreciation from him was an improvement. He never thanked her before. In fact, when she delivered his newspaper the day before, she'd been obliged to prompt him. This was a small victory, and one she savored. It was just so happened that she was at the register when Cain approached a few minutes later. Julia had trouble holding back a smile at the look that came over him when he realized it was her. "I see you found what you wanted," she said. "This is a good choice." "Thanks." He reached into the back pocket for his wallet and paid with cash. "Would you like a gift receipt?" she asked, as a matter of course. "No." "A gift box?" "No." He glanced at the wrist as if to suggest he was on limited time. She handed him his purchase. "Merry Christmas, Cain." He held back her gaze and then muttered, "Bah humbug." Julia couldn't help it. She laughed. "You don't like Christmas?" "Truth is, I don't have any good feelings, good or bad, over Christmas. It's something to be endured." "Endured? Christmas?" She held his look for an uncomfortably long moment. "I think that's one of the saddest things anyone has ever said to me." He shrugged as though it was a little consequence. "Can I do anything else to make Christmas better for you?" she offered. He shook his head. "No, thanks. That's twice now that you've thanked me." "You're keeping tabs?" She returned with the same gesture he'd given her, a shrug. "You aren't free and easy with your appreciation." "I'll get that right on that." His voice was emotionless, but Julia saw the teasing light in his eyes. She planted her hand over her heart. "Cain Maddox, you have a sense of humor. Who would have guessed?" He did then, and this was progress, real progress, whether Cain was willing to admit it or not. Cain returned from visiting Bernie and was happy. His grandfather liked his birthday gift. The minute he stepped off the elevator, he smelled baking. One of the last memories he had of his grandmother was baking him chocolate chip cookies. Every time he smelled that aroma, he felt the sense of loss. Even now, as an adult, he experienced a pang at the memory. His life had fallen apart after the death of his grandmother. His mother had abandoned the family when he was a little more than a toddler. His father hadn't been able to cope with him, and after a few short weeks he was sent to live with Cain with his grandparents. He remembered crying for his mother and his grandmother holding and rocking him. Whenever he was sad or experienced a bad day, she baked chocolate chip cookies. The first day of junior high, he got into a fight and was sent to the principal's office. His grandfather had been disappointed and lectured him, and in an effort to smooth over matters, his grandmother baked him a few of his favorite cookies. And since her death, he never touched them again. It was a tribute to the only woman who ever really loved him. Sure enough, Cain wasn't home more than 30 minutes when Julia showed up at the door. Schroeder barked just in case Cain hadn't heard her distinctive knock. He heard it all right, and would like nothing better than to ignore it. "Cain," she called out, I know you're home." One would think she would get the message, but apparently that was too much to hope. "What is it now?" he asked, doing his best to hide irritation as he flung the door open. Julia blinked at his lack of manners. What did she expect? By now she should know that he didn't welcome her company. Instantly he regretted his childish behavior and relaxed his shoulders. She looked adorable as in a Santa hat and a cute Christmassy apron. His appreciative glance was all she needed to proudly hold out a plate of chocolate chip cookies. They were wrapped in green cellophane and tied up in a pretty white bow. When he didn't immediately accept her offering, she said, "I baked these for you." "Thanks, but no thanks." Immediately the smile drained out of her eyes. "You don't like cookies?" "No." "Oh," she didn't back down. "In that case, maybe you'd like to take them into the office with you," she suggested. Her big blue eyes pleaded with him, only this time he wasn't giving in. "Why don't you take them to work yourself?" he countered. For a long moment she remained standing just on the other side of the doorway, as if she had trouble believing that he would turn down cookies. "I suppose I could do that," she admitted reluctantly. "Good. Now that settles it." He started to close the door. "There's some of my best cookies," she tossed out, cocking her head to one side in order to see him as he closed the door. He ignored her. He'd say one thing about Julia. She was persistent. In all these years he avoided chocolate chip cookies. This was the first time he'd ever been tempted, and that didn't settle well with him. In fact, it completely unnerved him. Julia's blog, 12 Days of Christmas, December 16th. Meet the man who turns down cookies. What man in his right mind turns down warm from the oven chocolate chip cookies? Ebenezer does. You read that right. I baked him cookies dressed up in a cute little elf apron, which he clearly didn't appreciate, and my Santa hat. I couldn't have looked more festive if I tried. Maybe I'm trying too hard. Every time I start to make progress, my hopes build up only to be slammed to the ground like an ocean wave overtaking a sandcastle. As you can tell, I'm frustrated. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I currently work for a large department store, and guess who came shopping in this afternoon? You guessed it, Ebenezer. Needless to say, he didn't look the least bit happy when he saw I was his sales clerk. But after I offered to help him, he actually thanked me. Oh, and one other important development. This morning, as I waited at the bus stop, I learned Ebenezer asked the barista about me. I repeat, Ebenezer asked about me. The thing is, and I hesitate to admit this, I've actually started to care about him. Not in a romantic way, don't get me wrong, but as a human being. I mean, when I started this blog, he's irritated me to no end. I had no kind thoughts towards him. I actually looked forward to being a pest. Guess that doesn't reflect very well on me, does it? The reason I mention this is because it feels like I'm right back where I started, which is pretty discouraging. This man is cold, and I'm beginning to doubt that the kindness can even touch him. And we will stop right there and pick up at chapter 4 tomorrow, and I will even mark chapter 4. I do work tomorrow, but I hope that this kindness experiment has made you think about how you can be kind all year long, not just during the Christmas season. That's one reason I really got into this book, was to find ways that we all can be generous and kind toward each other this year. Only takes an act of kindness to make a real improvement in this world. Don't forget that. That's part 1 of 12 Days of Christmas. You don't want to miss out on the rest of this amazing book. And here we go. Keep your social distance. Always wash your hands. When you can't wash your hands, keep your hand sanitizer nearby. Wear your mask. Be safe, be healthy, be well. 2021, what I hope for you is happiness, joy, good health, lots of wealth in your heart and in the bank, and lots of kindness. God bless till we meet again.